So for this topic video, we're going to talk about mental health concerns. So the first thing I want you to know about mental health is that we all experience depression, anxiety, irritability, all of those things we experience. And normally they could be response to something, worried about a test or worried about a project at work. Those are pretty normal. We all experience that. Now, when those feelings or those symptoms impact your day, sometimes to the point of not being able to function during the day, or it makes functioning more difficult during the day, that's when you want to get support for it. Now, with mental health symptoms, there's lots of different kinds of support you can get. Could be through medication, could be through therapy, could be through both, could be through watching TED Talks or reading books or talking to a friend or joining a support group. There are lots of ways to support your mental health. So let's look at some signs and symptoms that teens may be showing that could be some mental health issues. And these are just in general. A lot of it is if there are just changes. So, for instance, if changes in sleeping habits, it could be sleeping all the time, which a lot of teenagers do. So, is it different than their normal kind of routine? Are they unable to sleep? That could be anxiety related. Loss of self esteem and confidence. So, if they start to isolate more, if they start to be down on themselves more, they start to give up things that they normally like to do. Um, or if there's a decline in their normal functioning. So, if they're not doing their schoolwork, they're not going to school, those could all be signs of some mental health concerns. So in addition to those on the previous slide, there are also unexplained anger, irritability, social withdrawal. So we talked about isolation, but there's also those, deep mood swings. Changes, again, changes in weight and eating habits. So what is normal? If this is not normal for them, then it is something to notice or to check in with. Changes in personalities that are completely out of character. So again, if you're looking at your child and they're acting drastically different, there's usually something going on. So we want to just explore that. Explore that with curiosity, not with judgment. Could be mental health issues, could be other reasons, could be no reason. I don't know, but it's worth checking out. Now, also a sudden change in their peer group. So who are they hanging out with? Are they acting differently when they are with their friends? Are they, so what are they doing? And how is it different than what is normal for them? So, kids that, if there is a family history of mental illness, or if your kids have witnessed trauma or experienced any kind of abuse or instability, they're at risk of developing a mental health disorder as a teen. So, you just want to be aware of how the past can impact where they're at in their teenage years. And we talked about this before, but really look for those sudden changes in behavior and the decline in things that they used to enjoy and complete and actually, that they enjoyed and did well at. Very important to address it with early treatment because a lot of times, if there are mental health symptoms that are unchecked, they're going to find a way to cope somehow. So, a lot of times, that coping for anxiety or depression ends up being substance use. So, it's always good to detect these things early and see if there's a way we can help them heal, help them get support without it impacting their lives in a negative way, which those substances would. So, two big diagnoses for teens are depression and anxiety. And these symptoms can be pretty common in teenagers. There's just a lot of peer stress, a lot of pressures, a lot of changes in their body and their hormones. So, it makes sense that they would feel that way. So, when do those feelings turn into a need for mental health support? So, about 1 in 10 children between the ages of 12 and 17 experience an episode of major depression. So, if you were looking at diagnosing somebody with major depressive disorder, they would look for that low mood, the lack of interest of things that they used to like. Um, Now, teens are a little bit different than adults, which in their case, they'll have more irritability, falling grades, withdrawal from friends. Those are those signs of depressions that you also really see in teens. Also, disrupted sleep, feelings of hopelessness and guilt. Those are other symptoms that might suggest that they are having some depression. And other symptoms, such as a lack of energy, difficulty concentrating. Again, we've talked about changes in appetite, not having motivation, and then also some suicidal thinking. Now, again, these signs of depression could also be signs of just normal teenage responses to stress and peer pressure, or it could be something more severe. That is why it is good to ask questions and clarify with your kid. So now we're going to talk a little bit about suicide, and I'll just say suicide is a pretty scary thing to think about as a parent. One thing that I always like to say is that the more information that we have about something, the more we can try to understand it and the more we can help ourselves and our kids with it. So here's a little information. First of all, it's a third leading cause of death of 15 to 24-year-olds. So you remember, if you're a part of any of the brain information topic that we shared, that is when there's lots of feelings going on. Your amygdala, that part of your brain that feels, is working overtime at that point for teenagers. So you can imagine feelings are very strong, feelings are intense, and they're coming at them a lot. 60% of suicides are committed with a gun. Overdose is also something that's very common. Girls tend to think about committing suicide twice as much as boys, and they usually will do that with overdosing, cutting themselves sometimes inadvertently when they are self-harming, or just plain cutting themselves, wanting to die. Boys tend to die more from suicide, 4 times more than girls, and the thought is that they tend to use more lethal ways to do it. So that's a bit of information about suicide. So, what are some risk factors for suicide? Well, one is having a psychological disorder like depression or bipolar disorder. A lot of times with these mental illnesses, there's big mood swings and there's really low lows in terms of mood, and that's usually when that hopelessness is really there, and your kid is at risk. Alcohol and drug use, that is a huge risk factor. They're trying very hard to self-medicate with it, but as they build tolerance and need more and more of it, it doesn't end up working, and or it kills them, just the use, or it makes them even more depressed. Feeling distressed, irritable, those are risk factors. Feeling of hopelessness and worthlessness. Now, a previous suicide attempt, that's important, because if there is a past where they have attempted before, they may be more prone to try it again. Emotional, physical, or sexual abuse, has that happened in their lives? That is also a risk factor. Lack of support, poor relationships with parents and peers, feeling like they're isolated, and they don't have anyone to talk to. Also, struggling with maybe a gender identity or sexuality, and they don't feel supported by the people around them. Those are all risk factors for suicide. So let's get to some warning signs. And again, know your child. Know what their baseline in terms of their habits and their patterns and their likes and their dislikes. But here are some general warning signs that you can go by if they're talking about it. If they're giving hints about not being around anymore, if they are sharing with you they're feeling hopeless or guilty. See, all of those are kind of that early reaching out, hopefully, maybe somebody wanting to have that question asked, are you wanting to hurt yourself, so that way they could get help. That could be kind of those first kind of hints to others that I need help without actually saying it. I'm pulling away from friends or family, giving away treasures and possessions, losing the desire to participate in things, trouble concentrating, changing in eating and sleeping habits, and then also risk taking behaviors. I actually worked with a client at Drug and Alcohol who actually would tell me that some of his risk behaviors were kind of a slow form in him trying to complete suicide by doing those crazy things, by climbing up that cliff when he's with friends or driving recklessly. It was kind of tempting fate in his way of, well, I don't care if I live or die, so I'm just going to do these risky behaviors to kind of roll the dice. So all of those things are good for you to notice about your child. Ask questions, curiosity, not judgment. So important to hear how they are feeling, to acknowledge how they're feeling, and to get them help. So what do I do if my child is showing these red flags that make me afraid that they are going to harm themselves? First of all, it's so important to know those warning signs we talked about before, so that way you can be aware and ask those questions when they need to be asked. Some parents think that when their kids threaten suicide, that it's a way for them to get attention or to get out of something. Um, that I understand. I also understand that you want to make sure not to ignore those threats. Make sure that you are addressing them no matter what you may feel the origin is. Ask questions and listen. So important to ask if they are thinking about killing themselves. It's okay to say the words, it's okay to put it out there, because that's when you can really talk and get them help. If you're seeing those warning signs, you can ask. They give an example here. I've noticed that you've been talking a lot about wanting to be dead. Have you ever had thoughts about wanting to try to kill yourself? Very important. I've included the National Suicide Prevention Line. There's a text that you can do, the Trevor Lifeline for LGBTQ community, and you can also text START to that number. So you can stop the tape or video and write these down if you need to. Just make sure you're prepared so you can be there if your child does need you and they are at risk of harming themselves. So let's shift gears to anxiety. So here's some signs of anxiety. Reoccurring fears and worries about just normal daily life. Irritability, difficulty concentrating, having some really low self-esteem, and you're very self-conscious. Also withdrawing from social activity. So anxiety is important to learn about right now, because with the pandemic, anxiety in children and teens have increased dramatically. So we're seeing a lot of these signs right now. The world is just in a place where there is a lot of stress around. So if you add that to the stress that teens already experience, you're going to get a pretty anxious teen. Some other signs to look for are if your teen wants to avoid any difficult or new situations, complaints about stomach aches and headaches. When you are experiencing anxiety, there are nerve endings in your body that actually do, a lot of them gather in your stomach. So when you are feeling anxious, that stomach ache actually biologically is really happening. So some headaches and stomach aches could suggest some anxiety. Drop in grades, constantly needing reassurance, being clingy, and also sleep problems. So again, as I said in the beginning of the video, we all experience anxiety um, throughout our lifetime. So when is it a problem? So again, all of those red flags that you see, um, those are red flags that should lead you to ask those questions, to pay attention more to what your child is doing. Also, if you see them or you catch them coping with substances or other ways that are destructive for them. Those could be those ways that they are distracting from those feelings or trying to cope or control those feelings. If that is the case, they do need help with them right away. There are healthy coping strategies that can be taught if your child is experiencing anxiety. So, some do's and don'ts about helping your kid when they're experiencing these symptoms. The first is listen, ask them what they thought about and what they might need to get better. If they know, they may not know. Learn more about it, normalize what they might be experiencing. I mean, I do that with all the kids that I see, is normalize the stress of being away at home because they're a grizzly, normalizing some of the homesickness they might be feeling, normalizing the stress of doing this program causing anxiety. Yes, that all makes sense. Um, Acknowledge the fear and advocate for your child. So try not to minimize their concerns. If you tell them they'll get over it or that they're exaggerating, the thing to understand with that is that they are feeling that feeling in their teenage brain. And if they feel they can't say it out loud or talk to you about it, then they are going to end up keeping it in, holding it in, and then that does lead to those sabotaging behaviors, the coping skills that are harmful and will not be helping them. Um, don't let your emotions rule your response. So think about how you might be feeling if you are become more afraid hearing about their anxiety. Take care of your feelings before you continue to talk to them about. Do not use the word crazy. Crazy is a judgment. And if you think about it, for me, if someone called me crazy, then I don't think that I would be sharing about how I'm feeling again. Um, Try not to tell your child what they should be doing because how you'd handle it and how they'd handle it could be different. Help them with curiosity. See what they're already doing for their coping skills and see if you can either get them help or both of you can seek help on what are other good coping skills to help with the anxiety. Try not to argue and try not to compare your teens. All your kids, if you have more than one kid, they are born with certain temperaments. And that's just biological. So you're going to have some kids that are a little bit easier socially, and you're going to have some kids that are a little quieter, some that are go-getters, some that are not. That's biological. It's just the way they are. So helping them use and acknowledge their own personality and who they are and be able to enhance that as best they can, but not for them to be their sister or their brother, because they're not. They're their own person. So as I said also in this video, when you are trying to figure out with your child if this is a problem that requires intervention, talk to your child with curiosity and with empathy. If you can, think back to your teenage years. Honestly, with mine, I think it was a lot simpler than teenagers are now for kids with social media and everything like that. So there are probably a lot of things that I wonder how I would handle if I were a teenager at this point. So think about that. Don't lecture, don't judge. Think about the things I just said. Now, also, talk to some trusted professionals. Again, the more information you can get, the more it can help you and the more it can help your child. School counselors, church, doctors. Make sure your child understands that there is nothing wrong with them, that we feel all these feelings. And sometimes when these feelings are really, really big, then we need a little extra help figuring out how to handle them. There is nothing wrong with them. Also, remember to stay open to listening to them. And remember, they are talking from their teenage brain. If you remember this from some other videos, hopefully I'll remind you quickly that a teenage brain has a very strong emotional piece to it. Brains grow and change during your lifetime, and the teenage brain has a lot of emotion. There's a part called the amygdala that kind of holds the emotions in our bodies. And for a teenager, that is huge. They are biologically coming from a place where they experience emotions deeply. They are also coming from a place where peers are very important to them. Again, this is very biological. As they get into early 20s or so, little by little that starts to lessen, and then you kind of see the adult version of your child. But right now, they are still teenagers with that teenage brain. Here again are some resources. Feel free to stop the video and copy them down. NAMI is the National Alliance of Mental Illness. If you go on their site, there are a lot of resources there. There's also a phone number where you can call. And again, don't forget to have the National Suicide Prevention Crisis Line. And there's also a text line, which is great for kids too, because sometimes when kids are struggling, they want to be able to text, and that's more comfortable for them. So that is also an option. Thank you for listening.